You know that feeling, right? That knot in your stomach, the racing heart. We've all been there. But what's actually going on inside our bodies when anxiety takes over? Well, today, we're going to break down the science behind that feeling. We're going to look at anxiety as your body's very own built-in alarm system.
So let's start with this question right here, because it's one we can all relate to. Why does your heart start pounding when you're just thinking about something stressful? You're not running from a tiger, you know? You're just thinking about a work deadline or a tough conversation. But your body, it reacts as if the threat is right there in the room with you. And that physical response to a purely mental trigger, that's really the key to understanding what anxiety is all about.
Okay, so let's get a clear definition on the table. When we're talking about an anxiety disorder, we've moved way beyond just everyday worry. This is something different. The source material defines it as a state where your security feels threatened by danger, and here's the important part, whether that danger is real or just perceived. Your brain doesn't always know the difference. And that perceived threat is what leads to those severe symptoms. This is the point where the body's alarm system really starts to go into overdrive.
All right, and this chart is super helpful for telling the two apart. On one hand, you've got your everyday anxiety. Let's say you have a big presentation. It's totally normal to feel anxious. The intensity matches the trigger, it's temporary, and it doesn't really mess up your life. But then you have an anxiety disorder, and that's a whole different ballgame. The feeling is completely excessive and overwhelming, it's persistent, we're talking 6 months or more, and it has a huge disruptive impact on your life. So really, the crucial difference here is all about the scale and the impact.
So, the big question is, where does this all come from? How does the blueprint for this faulty alarm system even get created in the first place? Well, it turns out it's not just one thing, it's a combination of factors.
The research really points to an interaction between two key ingredients. Think of it like a recipe. First, you have vulnerability. This can be stuff you're born with, like a genetic predisposition, or things that happened early on, like childhood adversity. Then, you add the second ingredient, stress. This could be intense pressure from your job, or maybe a traumatic experience. And it's the combination of that underlying vulnerability and the external stress that can really set the stage for an anxiety disorder to develop.
Okay, now for the really cool part. Let's get into the mechanics of it. We're going to go inside the control room, the brain, and see exactly how this whole alarm system is wired and what happens when that big red button gets pushed.
So, the second your brain even thinks it senses danger, it does not hesitate, not for a millisecond. It kicks off this lightning-fast chain reaction, this response pathway that's hardwired into us. It's all designed to get your body ready for action instantly. It really shows you just how primal and automatic this whole response is.
And here's the chain of command, laid out nice and simple. First off, you've got the amygdala. Think of it as the brain's security guard, the threat assessment center. It's constantly scanning and asking, is this scary? As soon as it shouts danger, the locus coeruleus jumps into action. It's like the first responder, flooding the system with a chemical called norepinephrine. And finally, the hypothalamus. That's the general, the command center. It takes all those signals and coordinates the entire body's response. That's what makes your heart pound, your breathing get shallow, and your muscles tense up for a fight.
So, what's pulling all the strings here? What's making this all happen? Well, the entire system is run by these incredibly powerful chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. They're the ones zipping around, carrying the signals, and basically telling your brain and body how to feel and react from moment to moment.
I love this analogy on the slide because it makes it so easy to understand the main chemical players. So think of your brain's alarm system like a car. Norepinephrine? That's your accelerator. When you have too much, it's like your foot is slammed on the gas, making the whole system hypersensitive. Then there's GABA. That's the brake. It's supposed to slow things down to inhibit the response. So if you're low on GABA, you've basically got no brakes. And finally, serotonin. That's the cruise control. It's supposed to keep everything running smoothly and regulate the whole system. When it's not working right, it throws everything off balance. And remember, these chemical imbalances often link right back to that combo of vulnerability and stress we talked about earlier.
So we've got this super complex system of brain parts and chemicals all working together. But what happens when it malfunctions? You know, when that alarm gets stuck in the on position and just won't shut off? Well, that's when we start to see the different types of anxiety disorders, and each one has its own unique way of showing up. First up, let's talk about generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD for short. And just like the name suggests, this one is all about a state of constant, widespread worry. Yeah, this quote from the source material just nails it. The key words here are unrealistic or excessive.
We're not talking about normal worrying. This is next level. It's worrying about a whole bunch of different things, your job, your health, stuff that happens every day. But the worry is just completely out of proportion to what's actually going on.
So what are the key features of GAD? Well, for one, the symptoms have to be persistent. We're talking at least 6 months straight. It also tends to have a gradual onset, usually showing up around age 21 on average. The data also shows it's about twice as likely to affect women than men. And, no surprise here, it can be triggered or made a lot worse by severe psychological stress.
All right, next up we have a totally different kind of alarm malfunction, panic disorder. Now, if GAD is a constant low hum of worry, this is the complete opposite. This is a sudden, terrifying, all-out surge. And again, the clinical language here is just so vivid. An abrupt surge of intense fear or intense discomfort. That's what a panic attack is. They often feel like they come completely out of the blue, just hitting you with this absolutely overwhelming force.
So, the attacks themselves are usually pretty short but incredibly intense. They typically peak within just 10 minutes. But, and this is so important, the disorder isn't just about the attacks, it's about the aftermath. It's defined by at least one solid month of persistent concern, of worrying about having another attack. It's this fear of the fear that can become so debilitating. And it's a serious issue, as it's linked to a much higher lifetime risk for suicide attempts compared to the general population.
Okay, let's move on to another type of anxiety, one where the alarm trigger is super specific. Other people. We're talking about social anxiety disorder, or SAD.
So what's at the very heart of social anxiety? It's right there in the definition. A marked fear of social situations where you feel like you could be watched, judged, or scrutinized by other people. It's that deep fear of being negatively evaluated that really drives the whole experience.
This disorder has some really unique features. For instance, blushing is seen as the main physical giveaway that often distinguishes it from other anxiety disorders. And here's another key difference. Unlike with panic disorder, where you fear the anxiety symptoms themselves, with social anxiety, the core fear is of embarrassment. It usually starts to show up during the mid-teens. Oh, and it can also be specified as performance only if that fear is really just restricted to things like public speaking or performing in front of others.
So, after going through all of this, the brain pathways, the chemical messengers, all the specific ways this system can go wrong, it really leaves us with a final, powerful thought. If we start to see anxiety not as some kind of personal failing or a character flaw, but as what it is, a faulty biological alarm system, how does that change the way we think about it? How does that change the way we approach it, in ourselves and in others? It's definitely something to think about.